Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you happen to find yourself. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. We're so glad to have you here for our Diversity Forum series of advisor workshops. As you may know, the forum itself is designed to seek out and support and inspire those students that we find are typically underrepresented in the fields of international affairs. And we have a week like this for you as advisors to help make it easier for you, to help make it clear to you why their perspective is needed in the field and wanted in the field, and how we can hopefully help it make it easier for you to bring them into the field and to engage them in this way. We're particularly grateful as we move into this week for the help of the wonderful APSIA team, particularly Brianna Suarez and Melina Perez. We're also extremely grateful to all of the investors who make this week possible. In a special way, we want to thank the Harvard Kennedy School, Johns Hopkins SAIS, McLarty Associates, the Open Society Foundation, Princeton University's School of Public and International Affairs, the Syracuse Maxwell School, Texas A&M's Bush School, USC's Master of Public Diplomacy program, and the University of Washington Jackson School, who have invested in a special way in this effort. We look forward to seeing you all week, and hopefully you've had a chance to see the program for the session. If not, I'm going to ask my colleague Brianna to throw the program link into the chat. I encourage you to check it out. The bios are in there. All of the information on the sessions we're going to have this week are there. And I want to invite you in a special way to our session on Friday, which is a chance for Brianna and I to talk a little bit more about APSIA and all of the things that we can do for you as advisors as part of the Diversity Forum series. Recordings of this and all of our sessions that we're able to record will be available on YouTube as soon after this session, as technology will let us get it going. And I see all of you are so excited and itching to get ready, which is wonderful. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from our wonderful speakers today. And with that, I'm delighted to turn the floor over to Risha Patel from McLarty Associates. Risha, please.
Thank you, Carmen, and welcome everyone. It's very great to be here. I want to thank Carmen and the APSIA team for making us feel welcome and having us host this enlightening discussion. So I'm Risha. I'm currently an associate at McLarty Associates, which is a global strategic advisory firm located in Washington, D.C. And as you know, today we are launching the workshop series, and we're going to be discussing introducing careers in international affairs with our wide array of guest panelist speakers. And by reflecting and learning more about their careers in both public and private and nonprofit sectors, I hope all of you and all of our participants can reflect and understand the multiple pathways that are available to students in international affairs. So without giving too much away, I will just briefly introduce our speakers. So first we have Amy Donhauser, who is Senior Program Manager at We Care Solar. We have Alden Hartopo, who is Senior Associate at the Asia Practice at McLarty Associates. We have Sid Ravishankar, who is Staff Director at the Subcommittee of International Development and International Organizations and the Global Corporate Social Impact at the U.S. House Committee on Foreign Affairs. And lastly, but not least, we have Evania Robles, who's a program analyst at the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security at USAID. So you can find more details about the panelist bios in the program that was shared with you. And I will preview the format of our workshop today. So I will ask a few general questions to each of our panelists and welcome them to share about themselves and the careers that they have undertook. I'll encourage all the participants to turn on your cameras and please mute yourselves as we listen. And throughout the discussion, I welcome you to contemplate on the questions that you have. So at the end of our session, we'll open up the floor to all of you so you may ask our panelists questions. So feel free to use the chat box here, or you are invited to present your question by unmuting yourself at the end of the session. So if that sounds all good, we will start with our first question to our panelists. I'll turn it over first to Amy and ask, generally, what has your career involved and what has been some of your highlights along the way?
Yeah, thank you, Risha, and thank you all for participating today. So my career has involved primarily work in international development with a focus geographically in sub-Saharan Africa. And my work has, I've been engaged in the public sector. So I worked with USAID, the US Agency for International Development, in communications and program design and management roles. And then I worked for a multilateral organization called the International Organization for Migration, where I had a regional role in Southern Africa, working with various governments who are members of IOM to design migration policy. And then I shifted a few years ago to the nonprofit sector, where I'm based in the Bay Area, working with an organization that provides reliable solar electricity to last mile health clinics and schools in off-grid communities in Africa. So that's a very brief summary. And some highlights have just been the extensive travel to countries where we work, meeting with our partners, and I would say interacting a lot with government at the policy level and seeing the challenges and opportunities there, because there's a lot of good intention, but real constraints, and seeing how they manage those in real life has been invaluable for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Amy. And I think this will be a really great preview into how international affairs careers are very fluid in terms of where you move from private sector to public sector to nonprofit and everything in between. So I'll turn over to Sid if you also wanted to share some of your career highlights and what you've been up to.
Thank you, Risha. Hey, folks, I'm Sid Ravishankar. I'm right now the staff director for the House Foreign Affairs Committee Subcommittee on International Development, International Organizations, and Global Corporate Social Impact. There I support the work of Congressman Joaquin Castro, who's the chairman of that subcommittee. Before this, I was the head of the policy team for Secretary Castro's campaign, the presidential campaign for the 2020 primary. I actually mostly did domestic policy there for a whole year. And before that, I was working for Congressman Castro doing foreign policy. I joined Congressman Castro's office right out of SAIS in grad school, where I had studied concentrated in strategic studies, international economics, and also had minored in South Asian studies there. So I've kind of had I've been able to do a lot of domestic policy work, and with my current work is largely on foreign policy, and that's kind of where my career goals are as well.
Thank you for sharing, Sid. I think that's interesting that you made that shift from domestic to foreign policy very smoothly. I'll turn over to Alden now to share some of your career highlights too.
Thanks, Risha. Hi, everyone. I'm Alden Hartopo. As Risha mentioned, I work at a firm called McLarty Associates alongside Risha, actually. And my career, really started when I first moved here for graduate school in DC. Prior to that, I kind of hopped around, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was at a tech startup for a while, and I was in investment banking for a bit, and I was trying to figure out what was the best path. But for long, I was always in international relations major in college, and I was grateful to be able to go back to my roots. So my experiences have really concentrated more on in the private sector. I started my career really working in think tanks and in DC, both at the American Enterprise Institute doing international trade policy and the Center for Strategic International Studies, CSIS, working their Southeast Asia program before going on to Albright Stromer's group, working their East Asian Pacific team, and now at McLarty doing the same kind of work. I think the one in terms of highlights of my career is the past two experiences, at ASG, and I think just currently here at McLarty, is the opportunity to work with a lot of folks that have had established careers, whether it's at the State Department, the DoD, or even the White House, or firms are made up of a lot of these former diplomats who have, been foreign service officers for 20, 30 years have had tons of incredible experience. So it's really been an honor, and I guess a privilege to be able to learn and work alongside these folks.
Thanks for sharing, Alden. I think it's valuable not only in the work that you do, but the people that you get a chance to work with. That makes a career very powerful and memorable. So lastly, but not least, I'll turn the floor over to Evania. You can share some of your career highlights as well.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Evania Robles, and as mentioned, I am with the U.S. Agency for International Development. I guess I can start in undergrad. I think my career has been primarily in international agricultural development. I think that's been the primary path that I've been. I haven't really deviated much from that. And so for my undergraduate studies, I studied at UC Davis, where I studied in international ag development. And out of undergrad, I was kind of unsatisfied with the education that I had, not in the sense that it was bad education, but just in the sense that I wanted to really combine the natural science background that I had and social science background with governance and policy, and to being able to understand issues a little bit more broadly and deeply. And so for my graduate studies, I went to Texas A&M, the Bush School of Public Service and Governance. And there I was able to kind of really get that picture of how do you make policy? What is governance role in development? And so I felt like that was just really rounded out my education and also what I wanted to do with that. And so there I was fortunate enough to have had Andrew Natsios as my professor. He was a previous administrator for USAID. So I really got that hands-on education of kind of like what it's really like there. So I felt like it really prepared me in that journey, you know, kind of writing like briefers, action memos, all of the writing that I hadn't had experience with before, that government writing. And so I felt like that was really helpful to me once I did start my career. And, you know, I had a lot of opportunities to do research previously to joining the agency with USAID staff. And so it kind of rounded me out. I feel like that would be one highlight. And then since being at USAID, I have been able to work in coordinating and managing two big initiatives. Previously, I was a part of the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI team. That is a presidential initiative under the Obama administration. It is the primary youth development program in Africa. And so that was a really good experience, got to travel all over the continent. So that's always really fun. And then currently I am managing the Farmer to Farmer program, which is a program that's been going since 1985. So it's a really well-established program. And, you know, both of these programs are really known by Congress. So it keeps you really busy. And so I think that just adds a really fun element to my job. And hopefully I will be able to travel soon. I currently manage portfolios in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and Latin America. So hopefully I get to travel to those places soon.
Thank you for sharing, Evania. I think it's very interesting to see your journey from undergraduate and graduate school and beyond. I think discussing about the good writing skills that you had a chance to get mentored on and some of those valuable skills that any young professional needs, I would like to ask our panelists to share what are the specific skills that you have found really helpful to learn early on, and what would you advise young professionals that are looking to start in international affairs? What skills should they focus on? So I'll start off with Amy again, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I had highlighted and reflecting on skills in this field, and writing always comes to the top, in part because it has served me well. It's opened up doors for me professionally. I would say writing, and that falls under communications writ large. I think being an effective communicator is a critical skill set. I mean, it's a critical skill across multiple contexts, particularly in international affairs, as you're trying to navigate, you know, diverse cultures, diverse work settings, diverse work dynamics. You know, I started my career really as a Peace Corps volunteer in rural Senegal, where I worked alongside farmers and having to, you know, communicate with them on our project needs. And I've met the president of African countries in diplomatic forums. So it's, you know, the range and just being able to adapt socially, culturally, I think comes down to a lot of communication. And then in today's work age, where so much of it is writing, emails, letters, and whatnot, reports, memos, you know, as Evania mentioned, writing those memos was a critical skill. I would highlight writing for sure in communications.
Let me jump in. So I think I think the skills that I have found the most useful have been on like primarily on writing, which is what, like a lot of folks have mentioned here. There are different kinds of writing, and it's how, I think it's needing to know when what is kind of required. I think something that I definitely had trouble with right out of grad school as well was, being used to kind of academic writer and being used to having too much information in there, but just figuring out exactly what needs to come out, and like based on who's reading it, say in a memo style or so, knowing like everything that needs to be in there and not going anywhere further, because keeping the attention of the person who's reading it is probably the hardest thing to do, and it's very easy to lose people's attention on those issues. So one thing at SAIS at least is that they did do a lot of memo writing and kind of assignments, like instruction on that. And I found that was very helpful, but that's definitely something that I look for as well when I'm looking for people to hire or for people to work with as well.
Risha, I'm happy to also just quickly jump in and echoing, what everyone said. Writing is key, especially as well in the private sector, in our industry. A lot of the work our folks are pulling together are going towards executives who don't have the time to read, a 3-4 page report of sorts. And I'm sure Sid gets it working with a lot of congressmen as well. And they really only have the time for half a page to 1 page at times. I think one thing I will add, I guess, which is for our industry, is the research side. And it really complements writing in many ways. But for us, it's being able to identify, know what the good sources are, be able to differentiate between good and kind of like an unreliable source. And we learn a lot of that in school, but I think being able to continue, being able to differentiate, especially when you're writing and providing a lot of, important level, high level information for our clients, we need to make sure that our information is verified and comes from a good source. And so, being able to differentiate, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think good writing, but in that sense, brief writing, it's not flowery language. It's nothing that beats around the bush, very direct. And I think coming out of undergrad, it's a very difficult switch, to do that in grad school and then in your career. So it's having that practice earlier on definitely makes a difference. I agree, research skills and knowing how to find those resources, those go-to places. I think something that both applies to more strategic and policy planning at the agency, but also program management. I think skills that are relevant to both of those categories would be leadership skills and problem solving skills. It kind of goes without saying, but I think that in this case, in international development, it's really important for you to be able to find the answers yourself because the institution is quite complex. There's a lot of guidance, policy, the ADS, all of these congressional documents. You really have to have a skill to navigate all of that. And it's very confusing. It's very challenging, especially at the starting off your career. And even when you've been at the agency for a while, policy changes very quickly. So, being able to really learn how to navigate that efficiently, I think it's important. And I think leadership skills come into play as well, because either you're on the management side where you have to provide guidance to implementing partners and organizations who are doing the work in the ground. You have to make those quick calls and have those problem solving skills. And whether you are creating strategy at USAID, you really have to make even larger calls, right, at a bigger scale. So I would say that. And additionally, I would add, I think what I'm saying now, I think, in international development, I feel like everybody picks their geographic focus or the sector that they like to work on, but I think I'm seeing that even more now as the trends continue. I think the skills of collaboration, as well as being a good connector, are becoming more important now. Just being able to see in your resume or in your studies or in the things that you've been involved with, like, oh, this person can bring people together and bring a solution about, or this person knows how to think through critical issues and see the intersectionality between two things. And so I would add those two as well.
Those are really interesting points. And I think you all brought up very good points in that these skills are never in the silos together, that they always interact with other development that young professionals need to acquire, along with their academic background, their research, etc. I think a follow-up to that question, which would be helpful for our advisors, is students know that they have to acquire these skills, but what can advisors do to support the development of these skills while students are in their undergraduate and graduate careers and beyond? So I'll open up the floor to any panelist that wants to take that first.
I might just jump in because I have one that's top of mind. We were contacted recently by not undergraduates, but recent graduates looking for skill building and volunteering. And while we didn't take all of the volunteer services just because we don't have the capacity to manage interns at the moment, we did select a couple and they're building up their portfolio. So I would say to seek professional development, skill development outside of formal pathways. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a formal internship or a formal, even a job, but there are lots of ways to demonstrate a commitment to a certain sector. There are like free online courses. There are just things that you can add to your experience and skill set that that just show that you have initiative and a demonstrated interest in that. It kind of to set you apart from others, I think. Because when I'm recruiting to build out my team, that's what I'm looking for. Like, what have they done outside? And just one quick anecdote from my own experience, when I was interviewing for a regional role, not entry level, at IOM in South Africa, I was surprised that one experience in particular came up, and it was that I had volunteered in Washington, D.C. as a refugee family mentor, which was an unpaid role, but I happened to put it on my resume in like one little last line, and that was something that stood out, and it came up in my interview. So you never really know, but it demonstrated my commitment to refugee issues.
Just quickly to add a couple of things that come to mind. I guess since the audience is, from what I've picked up, is undergraduate advisors. I guess from my experience in undergrad is, if you're not able to, be in DC and intern and get all those experiences to build those skills, I mean, the one great alternative is to find jobs on campus and get involved in that. I went to a small liberal arts school in West Michigan. We didn't have a lot of opportunities to go to DC and have these great internships. And the one way I was able to make up for it was looking for opportunities to get involved, whether it was, building these kind of relevant skills at a research center on campus, working for a professor, helping run a center, doing a lot of that program management for a particular center. I worked in a student newspaper to improve my writing, to learn how to write concisely. There are lots of opportunities on campus that I think students can really take advantage of to build their portfolio in case, they're not, for example, here in DC and able to do those internships. And I would absolutely encourage advisors to tell their students to do that, because, when you're applying to a job, it's good to have a couple different experiences to demonstrate that you have the skills they're looking for in other ways.
So I think stuff that I've found folks have, been able to really improve their ability. I'll kind of walk through some of the skills that we're looking for that I think people can easily develop on undergraduate campuses or in grad school. One is obviously writing, but if you're looking at someone, I've found that when people have written for their school newspaper, when they've written for like the Political Review or so, like something where they write short, small things. Like op-ed writing skills are very, very similar to what I deal with every single day on the Hill as well. In fact, it's one of the hardest things to do if you're actually writing an op-ed as well, especially in someone else's voice. But seeing someone who has a kind of record of not just writing, but also putting their opinions out there, especially if it's kind of like blog posts, etc., if it's published, I think that's something that I definitely value. And I think that has a lot of demonstrates a lot of the skills that you need for most kind of foreign policy careers in DC. I think similarly, at least on the Hill, and anything really, and in other parts of DC as well, you never get anything done on your own. You kind of have to build a coalition for anything you do, right? If you're kind of acting on an issue, either in the advocacy space or working for a member of Congress, or even if you're in the administration and you need to get something through, escalated up to be made as a decision by the department. So I've found that folks who have a lot of experience in organizing in their campuses, if they're active in, either in foreign policy or in just political circles in their campuses, and kind of can show that they're able to talk to the broader community, get consensus, and push for action, like those are directly translatable skills to working in Congress or in DC in general, like the folks I work with on the outside in the foreign policy space as well. So I think those are all things that folks can do right now to help really and talk about it as well, right? When you interview or when you kind of talk to people for informational interviews and all of that as well.
Definitely agree with that as well. In the international development space, I think being able to show leadership and just involvement, even on the same issue that they're interested in, but domestically, which can be more accessible. I think that's always a really good thing to add to your resume. I would also add, depending on the student, I think it can be a little difficult, but reaching out to professors who are working on the topic that they're interested in, and potentially finding ways to connect with people at the agency organization they want to work for, and having informational meetings with them, and then potentially finding a question that they could research, or making those bridges and those connections. I personally found that in my resume, having USAID as many times as possible in my resume was really helpful. Some of it was actual direct internships. Some of it was me reaching out to people and offering to do a study for them, or a research paper for them. And so I know that it's a little difficult in undergrad to do that, but I think it's all very helpful. Something that I would also mention, I think, when time is limited, and I know that just student life is very busy, and sometimes resources is limited. You can't just go for a summer to Washington, D.C. and just, do this huge thing unless you have to in grad school, and then you just have to figure it out how to do that. I really recommend the virtual student internship, federal student internship called BSFS. I really recommend that. That's basically agencies like mine. We go on there and we say, hey, we want students to do this XYZ project for us. And we just put it out there, and then students apply if they're interested in doing that. I really recommend that, because you can do that from anywhere. It's remote. You don't have to pay anything. You just have to, give them your time. And that really, as I said, that gives you another way to add that agency or organization or whatever it may be on your resume. So I really do recommend that.
That's great to hear. I found the range of answers that you all provided very interesting.
If I can add one thing, if I see Model UN on someone's resume, I always, try to give them a give them a call, like the time of the day. I know a lot of people take kind of like clubs or activities that were a big kind of formative part of their either college or grad school experience, and like find that in common with someone, and it stands out. So everyone has a different answer. So if you're doing a resume, you can customize it as well if you know that they did something and you did it as well.
Sid, I think that's a perfect segue into my next question. So many of you have suggested specific things that you've put in your application or resume that helped your application or resume stand out. So as advisors are mentoring their students on, let's say, applying to your organization specifically, what would you recommend that they highlight or for their students in their application?
So I think I would say, especially for folks who are right out of undergrad, don't feel shy about adding things that may not be directly relevant to, say, foreign policy or so. I think people do, especially if it's like for an entry-level position and all of that. You have to think about kind of what concerns people may have for somebody who's right out of college, right? Is that they haven't worked at like a full-time job before, maybe, right? Or that they like a lot of questions about how their actions would be in terms of their responsibility or their ability to kind of like work in a kind of like a team environment. So I think the same thing. What I would say is that if you have, even if you've done something that's not at all related, and even if it was early, like right out of high school, or if it was kind of in the summer, or it was part-time, like all of that helps. At some point, you'll have to remove it from your resume, right? Just to make space, and you'll have to kind of time it, but don't feel like you shouldn't include something because it's not relevant if the kind of skill sets it can demonstrate about you are. That's kind of, that's what I would definitely, say to folks.
Do any of the other panelists want to jump in? Maybe anything specifically for your organization, let's say an opening came up for the fall, what would you recommend advisors help highlight for their students?
I think for us is, I know we haven't got a chance to talk about the work we do, but the way we're divided into regions. And it goes back to the idea that we have a lot of folks who are focused on a specific region, whether it's Sub-Saharan Africa or like me, I do Southeast Asia. It's always difficult to figure out how to best, I guess, match up with that, right? If you have any sort of background in this particular region, like how would you demonstrate that? Just like Sid said, there's plenty of ways to kind of throw that into your application. You don't necessarily have to say, I did research on this area. You could, for me, a bit about my background is I grew up in Jakarta, Indonesia. So when I was graduating from undergrad, I had a bit of that to throw in and say that, I'm actually from the region, and that's why I have an interest in it. I'm not necessarily, I haven't worked on it for, years, or I haven't done any internships on it, but I think a lot of my experiences that I can, really contribute to someone who has spent time there. And same goes for, leveraging those language skills, if it's, whether it's Mandarin, whether it's Spanish, there's Portuguese, you could really look for ways of where you use that, at work or in a volunteer experience. That all is using it in a professional setting. There's many ways of really bringing those relevant skills. And I guess that's what would be important for us, I guess, in my industry, in a regionally focused world.
Yeah, I might just add to what Alden and Sid said, and this is some advice that I was given actually earlier on in my career. Which is to sometimes list courses. If there are elective or really relevant courses, you may not have the work experience. You've had some academic training, you've selected to take a course in agricultural development or economics or something that's relevant. And to add what Sid said, I think if you examine the job description, look at the core functions, because yeah, you might not have a long career in solar. I mean, I didn't have a career in solar, but I'm very effective in my job because I meet the job requirements, and able to perform the specific function. So I'd have a close look at the job, and as it was mentioned, they want, like, you're hiring a well-rounded person out of college. You're not expected to have 20 years experience, so don't feel like that's required. And then also, I think Alden was touching on it, listing any sort of personal connection you might have to the job. For example, my father was a refugee to the United States, so I have that personal connection, which I, in my earlier days, would maybe highlight in a cover letter. And so I'd say, I always read the cover letter before I look at a CV when I'm recruiting, one, because of the writing tell, but also just kind of get a sense of the person and the story. And so I would say, don't overly focus on the resume, but also pay attention to the cover letter and the story you're telling.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that has been said. Listing those courses on there can be really impactful. Any research you've done, I think just really, if it's a geographical focus, really trying to hone that in and list it on your resume as much as possible. It doesn't have to be actual work experience, but it could just be like, I think at that point, people are really looking, do you have an interest in this? Have you thought about these issues before? No, have you actually done this before, right? It's just like, we want to gauge, have you thought about this? Have you been exposed to this? So I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
I think one of the things about any job that anybody I've seen also work in the space is you'll have something new thrown at you every day, and you may not always have a choice in what you're dealing with. So I think what I look for, what I think is also what, is like something that's valued highly, is showing that you're open to doing new things, but that you know the process and you know how to ask the right questions. I think everyone kind of comes out of undergrad or grad school even thinking, I know the issues, but it's not about the issues. Like, there's so many resources at everyone's hands to kind of figure out what's going on, that it's about, knowing, it's about being willing to try different things, or to like be able to do different things, and to like get up to speed on an issue really quickly. And, being able to demonstrate that. So I think people are kind of put off if someone who is right out of college or grad school kind of, like, unless they have a PhD or something, right? But if they kind of show, they kind of indicate that they know everything about the issue, it's like there's so much to learn even in your first kind of 2 weeks in any kind of new job. So, and I think similarly as well, so I get, yeah, there's kind of showing that you know how to approach a new issue, you're willing to take on new things, and that you have an excitement about the specific, about the topic in general, right? But not that you may have like some kind of specific agenda. Now, if it's like an advocacy group or something, people want to know what the passion you have is. But even if you have kind of a specific mandate for any job, you will be doing something different every day. So.
Thank you for sharing, everyone. I think that's a very good point. And I think that point in highlighting your personal story really does stand out in any industry that you work in. That is very important to share for your application. So thank you all for sharing. And I will float along one last general question before we turn to our audience's question. So I'll ask the panelists to reflect on their own personal journey and their professional journey, and highlight what were you glad that you did along the way, whether it was a career transition, whether it was one specific success that you had in your professional journey. So what is one thing that you're glad that you did, and one thing you wish you had did? I'll turn to Alden first.
Sure. So the one thing I was thinking about is very, very, it's a word obviously everyone knows here in DC, which is networking. And the reason I say this is because that's kind of how I ended up getting my job. Was doing proactive networking, which was really getting a chance to reach out to people, not necessarily as alumni, but just try to develop these relationships. And the story of how I got my role was, I met someone in January before I was graduating from grad school, and had coffee with her. She was actually, no, I backtrack. I met someone else who introduced me to her. It was a fellow alumni of another internship, and she was turned out to be someone who's now currently my predecessor at the firm. So in January, I was talking to her, and we had a great conversation. I kept in touch for a few months, and I touched base with her after I finished grad school. And she never responded to my email, which was fine. But I ran into her at a networking event, and she actually said, I'm so glad to see you. I'm actually leaving my job, and I really want you to apply for the role. I think you'd be a great fit. So in many ways, I actually was able to get in, to the door via actually knowing someone. So that's kind of, I guess, a highlight was networking kind of worked, I think, when done right. And in many ways, folks think networking is a very icky DC term, but I think it's a great chance for folks to develop relationships and really learn about what opportunities are out there. To be frank, I didn't even know my whole industry existed if it wasn't for networking, if I didn't talk to people who told me about this intersection of business and government and policy. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity. And if there's one thing that I could do over again, I mean, I would probably, know more about it in my undergrad. When I was in college, I didn't have a lot of these resources telling me to do this networking thing. It was really a DC term I learned when I moved to for grad school. So I would be grateful if my advisors really were better at pushing this idea of networking and the benefits I could have learned from it.
I'll jump
So
in.
I can, so I think it's kind of combination, right? When I was especially in grad school, I thought what I needed to do was kind of show that there was a specific issue that I really was able to, that I was able to master, that I knew, because, and it was like a specific kind of area of the world and kind of an issue set that I'd worked on. What I had done, which was very useful for me as well, was making sure that, different projects where I had the opportunity to write, choose the topic of a paper or a project or something, always had a link back to what I had kind of set up as my, as what I wanted to position myself at the end of the master's program itself. So even if it was like an economics course, or if it was, something not directly related to it, there's always flexibility in kind of being able to build a paper trail, and also of looking at a specific issue from different angles. That really helps you kind of show to people, if you're interested in that career, that, hey, I have this record of, looking at this issue in different ways, and that, I've kind of thought things through, and that I do have credibility on this, rather than trying something new in every single project and, every single paper that you do in grad school. I think what I did not kind of take advantage of, though, was people are always willing to talk to you if you're in grad school, especially alumni, but really anyone. So whether you're in a DC-based school or not, right, especially these days, like I just did not spend enough time kind of talking to people and kind of figuring out what options there are out there. The reason I ended up on the Hill is because someone knew there was an opening and kind of thought I would be a good fit. I wasn't even looking for it, but I think that if, say, I might have, wanted to come here proactively, if I had spoken to people, I just kind of dismissed it and hadn't really spent enough time networking until it was kind of, later in the process, really.
Yeah, at the sake of, at the risk of sounding repetitive, just want to reiterate what Alden and Sid have said in terms of the value of networking. And I still have an aversion to the word, even though so much of my career has resulted from effective networking. I think of it more as like relationship building, because I mean, my last 3 roles, similar to Alden, I was approached about a role and asked to apply. And I just don't think you get traction like that applying cold anywhere, especially at large agencies, but even small organizations that are competitive. So relationship building is really important. And also just adds a certain sort of depth to any sort of job and career, and it makes it more meaningful, I think. But the thing that came to mind, Risha, when you asked the question, is taking risks. I think earlier on, I'm really happy that I was able to like move to Senegal or South Africa and take these risks and really follow my passion, especially early on, because it opens up doors. You meet more people, and that might not be the case for everyone. As you said early on, foreign affairs careers there are multiple pathways. People I went to graduate school went from the CIA to nonprofits. I mean, there's just multiple career paths. But I would say take some risks, and it's okay to move around. You don't need to have it figured out by age 25, and there's definitely a value and some exploration in those early years, especially.
Yeah, agreed with everything that's been said. Yeah, I think getting an internship at USAID, which was difficult enough, it's not an easy thing. It's not a very straightforward process. Sometimes you can't even find the internships, but I was lucky enough to have one there. And while I was there, I did have tons of informational meetings with all kinds of people from all levels, and that really definitely helped. So by the time I graduated, I had contacts at different places, and within the government, at least at my agency, it's not that these people can offer you a position, but they can at least tell you what's available and if you qualify, and help you navigate that process, because it's very confusing. It's not intuitive. Like USA jobs is a nightmare. Truly, to apply through that portal it's very confusing. So you really do need partners and allies to support you and champions for you to help you navigate that. Even just really literally applying or literally telling you, hey, this bureau is contracting with this contractor, so you should look at this contractor to find entry-level positions that way, because the likelihood of you becoming a direct hire is very low, especially now. So really just helping you navigate what it's actually like on the ground. So I definitely echoed that. Something that I wish I would have done differently, although it kind of hasn't impacted me so far, so I don't really feel that way, is that in undergrad, I already knew Spanish. So I already had a core language that I knew was going to be relevant to my career in the future. So I was like, let me do something fun. Let me do Italian. And it was fun. And it is great to know Italian and understand the language. It's, for more social and cultural purposes. But I do wish that I would have taken another language, a language that's predominantly spoken in Africa, maybe Swahili or French, literally anything else. So taking that seriously and, doing the right, like the hard thing or the boring thing is not often the attractive one. It's like I did my study abroad in Europe, although I did work with the European Parliament on development issues. Maybe I should have gone somewhere else for that opportunity and that internship and that summer abroad experience. So just really accepting that fact and really working with something in that field.
Thank you, everyone. I think that was the perfect segue into some of our wonderful questions from our participants. I'll turn over to Mary's question about what foreign language skills do you think are important and of international experience, and combining also with Caitlin's question, of studying abroad. How does that play into your career specifically? And what skills would you highlight from study abroad or international experience generally? So a little bit dense, but I'll turn over to Amy first, because I know you mentioned some of this earlier.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the questions. I did study abroad. I lived in France for 1 year, and it was a challenge as an American to create opportunities for speaking French in France, because I was often sought after by other students wanting to practice their English. So it takes a lot of dedication, but the French, I was a double major as an undergrad, and French was one of my majors. So I had a base, but having that real life immersion experience really solidified my language skills. And that has served me throughout my career, because I've worked in Haiti and throughout sub-Saharan Africa. I lived in West Africa for over 2 years, and I would call it an essential asset. It's been an asset in my career. It's definitely not been a hobby, and I maintain it now. So I don't use it daily for work. I have a language partner because I just recognize the importance of having that skill set in my career.
So I guess on my end, I haven't had that many opportunities to use foreign language skills. In grad school, and I studied Hindi and Urdu. It's not my language I speak at home, but that's not kind of. I think one of the issues, one of the realities of kind of where I've kind of like where my career's ended up is that I had kind of set out thinking that that those are the issues that I would want to work on foreign policy issues. But some of the realities, especially because I've been in a position that's so politically connected, like tied to the kind of politics at the moment as well, is that I haven't always had choices on what I'm going to work on. Like I'll give an example. In the House Foreign Affairs Committee last Congress, I was the staff director for the subcommittee on oversight and investigations. And after we came to this new Congress, the title of the subcommittee and jurisdiction changed to be International Development, International Organizations. So I think at least in the kind of often you may not have that much of a choice. And of course, like my decisions to continue working with this member of Congress, like it's not like I don't like these issues, but sometimes you may not find that in some fields. But times I really wish I had, learned particularly Spanish because of constituent like outreach. There are a lot of folks in the district in Texas who speak Spanish primarily, or if we talk to people from other governments, either, activists or people who are affected by US foreign policy or foreign governments, that definitely comes up. But there it's kind of, if you choose to specialize, right? There are definitely careers that don't require foreign language kind of expertise in foreign policy careers, but there obviously are a ton that do as well. So,
just to quickly, first of all, I completely agree with what everyone said. I mean, I guess for me, really leveraging my language experience has been helpful to, aside from being able to read local sources to get kind of a different source of intel than your English BBC or CNN or whatever. Being able to look at those local sources has been incredibly helpful, and having that language ability has been great. The other thing is, for me, I've actually found it advantageous to develop relationships, with folks, being able to speak the language. For example, I work a lot with the Indonesian embassy here, or folks, other embassies in our region, and kind of having that, relevant language really helps you get a deeper sense of that relation. I've heard similar stories with folks who, speak Spanish and work with Latin American embassies here. They're really able to get to a different level of relationship with these individuals. And I think for our industry, where relationships are incredibly important, it gives you an advantage. I can't really speak on study abroad. I would say I'm still studying abroad because I came as an international student. So my 4 years in college were actually a big study abroad for me. But international experience is incredibly important. I would say if you're looking to especially go into focus on a region, I think it really gives you a step up. For example, I know that folks that do work on China issues, almost every single person has lived in Beijing, or studied there or did a semester there. If you don't do it, you're really at a disadvantage. So I think it would be helpful if you kind of know what region you want to do and you kind of plan around that.
Yeah, I agree that, studying abroad can really hone in your language skills. If that's not your mother tongue, or just you're not native to that language, it's really important to study abroad and practice that with people and just really be immersed in it. Hopefully you can be immersed in it. I know that people do seek you out to speak English with you, but I do think that helps you tons. And actually you build that conversational, social capacities that you might not be able to get just from doing, a year or two in undergrad. So I agree with that. I, at least in my career, I focused on areas of conflict. So I couldn't really travel there. I mean, some people probably would argue with that. I did not travel there. And so I really just had to lean on research and just getting as much skills as possible through other venues besides actually being in country. So that's a nuance that I'll say, that it just really depends what you're focused on. In terms of language skills, I honestly haven't come across many applications where they say you have to know another language or you have to know this particular language. It's only it's at USAID. I know that some, implementing partners, if you're implementing the project itself, of course, you would need those language skills, but at least at USAID, I have not come across many requirements that you say you have to. Of course, if you have that on your resume, it helps immensely, right? You're able to understand different cultures in a more intimate way that you would otherwise. So I think there's flexibility there, but I do think you have to know a second language. I think at this time in general, even if you're not in this field, you should know a second language if you're living in the United States.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. I think that was a tricky question to tackle. So thank you for sharing your own experiences as well. There's some great questions in the chat box, so I apologize if we don't make it to all of them. But I will revert to one of our first questions, which is asking, are there opportunities open to non-US citizens with degrees? And I know Janine also just asked, are there opportunities for international students in this field? So panelists, if anyone wants to jump in to answer that.
I can start because I was an international student. There's a ton. I mean, there's limited. You can't really work in the U.S. government or anything that requires, I guess, clearance at the end of the day. So the one thing I will say is, if you're looking for internships, first of all, think tanks offer a great way to get in. I mean, I think any place under the work authorization we're given to CPT, OPT, there's plenty of opportunities to take advantage of that. However, if you're looking for full-time opportunities, that's where it gets a bit tricky, especially international affairs. The visa situation comes up. The one thing I'll encourage is, look into private sector companies because they might be more willing to sponsor. But I will say that a lot of think tanks are considered, H-1B cap exempt, which allows them to hire internationals. I have a ton of friends at the major think tanks here in DC who are international and who have been sponsored visas. So there are plenty of opportunities, but I think, to be honest, it is a lot more difficult. You have to definitely encourage students to work harder, because I've always told people, we need to be better than the average American candidate, right? Because it's easier to hire them than us. So I won't say it's easy, but I think, advisors work hard to help push these students to kind of, really broaden their portfolio and work hard to get opportunities and network well. There's plenty of opportunities out there.
Hey, so I am not an international student, but just stuff that I've kind of seen happen as well. Especially if you're in DC, there's the multilateral institutions where they can, they have a kind of separate visa category. And I know a lot of folks who are international students from SAIS, where I went, ended up there, and kind of once they kind of found their footing, figured out how to make the visa situation work for moving on somewhere else. But the World Bank, the IMF are the big ones in DC, but there's also like the OAS, the UN, there are a bunch of others as well, but the bank and the, IMF are the two big ones in DC. There are a lot of folks I work with all the time who are not US citizens, but, usually it's harder to do it in government. There, you can't, if you have the right kind of, like residency status, et cetera, you can work on the Hill for members and even cover foreign policy, but, there are a good number of folks I know in the advocacy space who are all very effective and kind of big parts of our broader international affairs community in DC who are not necessarily U.S. citizens, right? But I think, as Alden said, the visa issue is going to be a big problem, and I know that a lot of people I know, a lot of close friends I had really did struggle with that. So just kind of know what your options are when you're moving towards graduation.
Yeah, I totally echo that. I think international organizations, multilaterals in DC are a really great place. Even with the UN, I often feel like it's favorable to not be American because there's quotas that Americans, they're always meet their quota. So it's very difficult actually to get a job if you're American. So actually it's really great for other students to be able to apply to those jobs. And it's not a guarantee, but at least that there's a demand for that on that end. I would also say for USAID, if the student is interested in going back to their country of origin or living abroad, there's a lot of opportunities for foreign service nationals. Primarily like good portion of USAID staff is foreign service nationals. So they do a lot of the work that the agency does abroad. So that's a really good opportunity if they would like to go back to their country or a different country to work with USAID. So I would say that, and there's also personal service contracts as well that they could apply to, that they're eligible for to work abroad.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that looks like that might be the end of our time. I want to really thank our panelists for your wonderful sharing your wonderful experiences in your careers and beyond, and really getting to the bottom of why did you choose an international affairs career, and helping our advisors help shape their students' perspective on what a possible international affairs career can look like. And I will turn it back to Carmen, who will be launching a brief Zoom evaluation poll for all of us.
Thanks, Risha, and thanks to all of our wonderful speakers. We do ask all of you to just weigh in very quickly. It's 2 quick questions to let us know how we're doing. I also look forward to seeing all of you at our other sessions this week, where we'll talk about some of the things that I know were in the chat and we unfortunately ran out of time to do, things like Boren and CLS and fellowships and Fulbright and all of those wonderful experiences. So this is the beginning, and we look forward to continuing this journey with you all throughout the week. Thank you again so much to our speakers and to our advisors for being here with us. Again, please let us know how we did in this quick poll, and we will have the recording to share with you all as soon as we can after this session.